The month of September is Suicide Awareness Month. And I find that's something that we don't talk about as much. It's kind of a taboo topic. Maybe there's the fear, and I know there's the fear of if we talk about it, is it going to happen, right? And that's really not the case. And I'll tell you, before I get into some stats, and I have songs, and I have shows, and I have numbers, and support, and references, and some, things that are really just going to be super helpful today. But I do want to just tell a quick story that when someone comes to you and expresses concern about themselves, calling them selfish is not going to be something that helps them feel heard and seen. If anything, you're validating those exact fears that they had. You're validating the fact that they are now a burden. That's a common term that you'll hear them say, I'm a burden to other people. So before I get into my story, I want to talk about some stats here, and I have it on my phone. So I got it from a couple websites. Of course, I'll state where the references are. So from the APA website, just some interesting facts is that alcoholism plays a role in 1/3 of all completed suicides. In addition to that, most suicides begin during the beginning of the week. I didn't know that. That's an interesting stat. According to the APA website, it says, survivors of intimate partner violence are twice as likely to attempt suicide multiple times, and cases of murder-suicide are most likely to occur in the context of abuse. So why do I mention this? Well, if you're more than likely listening to this podcast, you are a survivor of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and if that thought had never crossed your mind of how am I going to get out of here, is this an option? Then kudos, honestly, to not ever having to get to that point in your heart. I can say that I didn't feel that way in my worst relationship. I, the entire time, was planning an escape plan of how to get out. And yes, there was fear. My parents even had fear that I'd be on the news with what this just said, with a murder-suicide, that was what was going to happen. And the chances of that happening are 3, 4, 5 times greater in the first 2 weeks from leaving your abusive partner than after, or than not leaving at all, which is why it's so scary to leave. And you don't just tell people, well, just leave. It takes some thought to leave safely, which is the most important piece of this. Okay, safely for you, safely for them, not trying to put them at risk, even though you're not responsible for them. If you have kids involved, not trying to get kids involved with anything and making sure everyone's safe. So it says, when people come in because of intimate partner violence, psychologists often pay more attention to the violence in their lives instead of how helpless and hopeless that violence makes them feel. They may feel the only way out is to kill themselves. Similarly, people will come in after a suicide attempt, but if you don't ask directly about violence, they often are too ashamed to talk about it or don't see the connection and don't volunteer that information. And that is a really, really big piece to that too. So then it follows up to say partner violence against men by women happens much more than most mental health professionals realize. And the initial evidence also suggests that male victims are also at risk for suicide. And which is really interesting because a lot of the people that I talk to that have sessions with me, the majority are men. I have a lot of women, but for some reason, while men are commonly known for just swallow your feelings, act like a man, if you can't see me, I'm using air quotes, they're told all of these really toxic phrases that prevents them from feeling comfortable to be vulnerable with their feelings. And it's kind of maybe a little bit more intimidating for a man to approach a man about that. What I found was interesting was that they found it comfortable to talk to me, a female, whom they just got abused by, a female, right? So it's an interesting dichotomy where, they're seeking out, I think it is that they're seeking out some validation from the opposite sex who they were just harmed from, that their ex was wrong, like they were abusive, and not all women are this way. So I'm so sorry if you've ever had to go through this. Before I move on to more notes that I took down on my phone, I want to share a story about mine. I know that I go to school for military and emergency responder psychology. I'm actually starting, but things were wrapping up, and I'm starting my practicum and my internship at a local Missouri behavioral health suicide hotline. And I'm going to be taking these phone calls for the next year. And I just know that when I was hit, when I was physically abused by the man I dated in high school, when I was a senior, My mom didn't know. No one in my family knew what had happened. They just knew that I packed up all my things and drove my sister's T-top Camaro back from Chicago to Arizona. No questions asked. I just said, we got in a fight. I'm not going to school there anymore. I'm going to start my new life here in Arizona, and which is where I hated it because I hate triple digit heat. I cannot do anything above 85 degrees. I just go inside. So I'm on a walk with my mom one evening, and we would go on 3-mile walks every day or jogs. It just varied. And I remember telling her, very, very scared. I was terrified to even say this out loud. My family is very much the toxic gratitude, the toxic positivity. How can you feel certain ways? You shouldn't be sad, right? So suppress everything and just only be happy. If you're breathing today, doesn't matter that you have a shitty job or that your boss berates you or that your husband hits you. You woke up today, right? I mean, that's the kind of mentality, which I can see where they're coming to from a point. Like you have a chance to change things and move things and get out of situations, but that doesn't always translate that way. So when I was on a walk with her, I had expressed, again, not what had happened, which is exactly what he said. They're not going to go into the violence happening because of the shame involved already, that you almost feel like you allowed that to happen. This happened. You also don't want to cast light on that person in fear of retaliation, in fear of no one's going to believe you, in fear of what did you do to provoke them. I mean, there's so many things that we hear, you guys, that it's not very encouraging or an encouraging environment for us to speak up because I would say most of the time that we do, there's a shutdown to that. So I told her that I had feelings of not being able to move on with my life. It was too much for me to handle. I didn't know how to move forward with this. And she was under the impression it's because I was having a heartbreak and being a dramatic teenager. And I was 18 and a half, 19 at that time. It wasn't the case at all. This man who I had vowed to love, that I gave myself to, which she also didn't know about, that I had given myself to, had then laid his hands on me. I felt like this is, I was raised with, you were only allowed to be with one man. And if I was then forced to be with this man and have a life of being hit, I don't want that life at all. Then I guess I have no life. That was my mentality. And that's the toxic part of it. I apologize if I get a little emotional doing this because her response was so toxic. And maybe at the time, she didn't really, I know she didn't. We all want to give benefit of the doubt, right? That she didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to handle it. But I wasn't the only kid of hers that had this thought. And I'm certain I'm not the only one that's approached her about it. At that point, I'm 18. I'm the youngest of 5. So if I was 18, my oldest sibling was already 29. There's 3 kids in between that. But she had said, Regina, quit being so selfish. Quit being so selfish. Mind you, at this point, I haven't even finished a degree. I have no kids. I have no, real relationship that was healthy. And she's just thinking you have so much of life ahead of you and all this. And she also sees what she endured. And she endured a lot from her partner and still continues to. Let's keep it present tense there. So when she said that, guess what happened? It did not validate anything that was a safe space for me to express any of those feelings, which was my childhood anyway. It wasn't a safe space to express that. Did I go anywhere else and express that? No. Did I start seeing therapy? No. I fell backwards into higher education at that point when I returned to Arizona, and I still work in higher education now. And that's when I believe I started my bachelor's degree in psychology. And then it just kind of started going from there. And with that being said, there's a couple things on here that I have saved. So let me just go find those again real quick in my phone. There's a lot. So it says, there's suicide warning signs. So how would she have known? She wouldn't have known that I had just gotten hit and that I gave myself to this man who then abused me. She wouldn't know this stuff unless I told her. So that's where shame comes in. And so when someone shares with you that they're feeling this way, allow that to be an opportunity to talk about it, to talk about why they're feeling that way, to talk about what happened, because that's just the manifestation. That's just a symptom. They're feeling this way because of XYZ that happened. So we need to find out what those XYZs are. And, you may be thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not equipped for this. I'm not licensed. I have nowhere to go. It's totally fine. Just be a safe space for them.